بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأن محمدا رسول الله خاتم الأنبياء والرسل أجمعين، المرسل رحمة للعالمين، وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. سبحان الله العلي العظيم، نؤمن به ونستعينه ونستهديه ونستجيره ونستنصره، فإنه حقا من هدى الله فلا مضل له، ومن يضلله فلا هادي له. ونسألك يا رب، نسألك أن تقسم لنا من خشيتك ما يحول بيننا وبين معاصيك، وأن تقسم لنا من رحمتك ما يقربنا من طاعتك، وأن ترزقنا من اليقين ما يهون علينا مصائب الدنيا وأحداثها. والصلاة والسلام على محمد خاتم النبيين وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. Subhanallah, I had prepared a khutbah that I thought I should include heartwarming story from the Seerah, and this is what I plan to share with you today, until subhanallah I saw a news item that changed the entire khutbah in an instant. The point of a khutbah is not to educate a lazy audience, not to replace the mandate to pursue knowledge and to pursue an education in the affairs of the deen. The point of a khutbah every Jum'ah is to bring to the forefront what should be a primary issue of concern for Muslims within a certain place at a certain time. Khutbah al-Jum'ah in many ways is where we exercise the example of al-amr bil-ma'ruf wa nahy an al-munkar, living a life where we call for what is good and we speak against what is evil and bad. If the khutbah itself doesn't carry this example forward to Muslims, then it has failed in its main objective and purpose. The news item that made me change the entire khutbah just minutes before the beginning of Jum'ah is yet again about Masjid al-Aqsa and Quds, Jerusalem. Hayy Jarrah is not the only area around the Aqsa Mosque that the Israelis have been attempting to ethnically cleanse. Ethnically cleanse by kicking out the Palestinians who have lived in this area for hundreds of years and giving their homes to Israeli settlers. Settlers who often come from Western countries, especially the United States, and who take that home in Jerusalem often as a second home or a third home. After they settle there for a period of time to establish residency, they will often close up the home and it becomes their summer home whenever they come in the summer while living their permanent lives elsewhere, especially the United States. But regardless, Palestinians who have lived there are people who have lived under occupation, under an illegal occupation. There is no legal occupation, but under an illegal occupation since '67, and do not have any citizenship. The only citizenship they have is the Palestinian citizenship, which doesn't exist. So in other words, all they have is travel documents. They are not citizens of Israel, and they're not citizens of any other country. And Israel ejects Palestinians from their homes, forcing these Palestinians to fend for themselves, destroying entire families, simply because they are Arab and Palestinian and Muslim, and then turns around and hands their homes to Israeli settlers. And somehow, so many people in the United States wants us to somehow look the other way and forgive this fact, because they claim Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. Well, apparently they haven't been paying attention. They haven't paid attention to the history of modernity, because democracies, even if it is a democracy, democracies are capable of creating very immoral things. Just because you're a democracy doesn't mean that the policies you pursue are necessarily moral. If a democracy is the will of a majority, then all you need is a majority that wills something immoral for it to become a policy. And this democracy has a permanent minority, a permanent Arab minority that by law can never hope to lead the country. By law, they're Arabs in a Jewish state. And by law, any Jew around the world has rights that trump the rights of any Arab born and raised in Israel. But these are the Arabs who even have Israeli citizenship, and they are a minority. The majority are Arabs who live under occupation. They don't have Israeli citizenship, and they don't have any other citizenship. And their homes have been their homes for hundreds of years. And when Israel comes and kicks them out of their homes, they become displaced and homeless, fending for themselves in a hostile environment where they are a people without a country, without a land, without dignity, subject to the whims of racism and bigotry. Jarrah is not the only place. The news item that I heard is now Israel reportedly have given the Palestinians of Silwan 48 hours to evacuate their homes. Silwan is made of 6 neighborhoods. All neighborhoods in Silwan have been inhabited by Palestinians for hundreds of years. Families that have lived there for as long as anyone can remember. The grave sites has the names of these families going back generations upon generations. But like Jarrah, Israel wants to ethnically cleanse Silwan. Why? Because Jarrah is to the north of the Aqsa Mosque and Silwan is to the south of the Aqsa Mosque. They are 2 neighborhoods that surround the Aqsa Mosque. And Israel doesn't want Palestinians to be the majority living around the Aqsa Mosque. Israel wants to ethnically cleanse the area around the Aqsa Mosque and settle Jewish settlers around the Aqsa Mosque as part of a long ongoing process of attempting to completely dominate and control the fate of the Aqsa Mosque. Every time Israeli settlers violate the sanctity of the Aqsa Mosque, it is the inhabitants of Jarrah and Silwan that rush to defend the sanctity of the Aqsa Mosque. And Israel understands that very well. And this is precisely why both in Jarrah and Silwan, nearly every family there has a family member that has been arrested, jailed, or killed by Israeli forces. Since 1986, Israel has been trying to kick out Palestinians from Silwan, using every trick in the book. Initially, they assessed very excessive costs that were supposedly due upon these Palestinians. When most Palestinian families paid the amount of money that Israel said they owed, Israel then claimed that Silwan was inhabited by Jews in the Ottoman period, without any proof, historically or otherwise. They even claimed that this area once housed or once was part of the kingdom of David and Malik Dawood alayhi salam, and Nabi Dawood alayhi salam. Any living witnesses from the time of David alayhi salam? Any written record? Any archaeological record? There is none. But even if there were, these are people who have lived there for hundreds of years. And it's not that Israel wants to demolish the homes to preserve history. Israel wants to empty the homes, to hand them over to Israeli settlers. Hay Silwan, like Hay Jarrah, has been under siege at least since 1986. And then yet again, a news item that Israel is escalating the confrontation and escalating the ethnic cleansing and demanding, in violation of international law and in violation of all morality and ethics, that these Palestinians pick up and leave. And literally the very next day, their homes are turned over to Israeli settlers. We pass over this all too often, all too quickly. All these Americans that support Israel, how would they feel if upon notice they had to evacuate their homes immediately and turn them over to the right race or the right religion? All these people who swear by the life of Israel, all of them are comfortably nestled in their homes, paying their mortgages, owning their cars, planning their futures. And they wouldn't imagine a scenario in which anyone has the right to come and say, leave, because a different race is entitled to your home. But all types of so-called respectable people don't care. Law professors, medical doctors, educators, highly intelligent, accomplished individuals. But have they ever looked in the mirror and asked themselves honestly why they don't care? Because if they would know the answer. It's because the victim is considered in their psychology, in their subconscious, subhuman. The victim is an Arab. Put bluntly and simply, because they are racist. But they use all type of intellectual tricks to step aside and leave alone the issue of racism and talk about democracy and the country of human rights, although Israel has a miserable human rights record when it comes to Palestinians again. It is mind-boggling. It is thoroughly confounding. If this is not colonialism, then what is? If you come to natives who have lived in a land, in homes, for hundreds of years, and you come to them and you say, leave these homes, because I'm going to settle people who come from New York and from France and from the Netherlands. If this is not colonialism, then what is? If this is not racism, then what is? Hay Silwan is yet again under siege. The remarkable irony is that Israel, which is very adept at exploiting the language of peace and tolerance and coexistence, like the legacy of colonialism, you speak high principles and you commit horrible atrocities. This is the legacy of colonialism. You speak about rights and human values and goodness and morality and ethics, but you come to erase, to a subcategory of natives, and you don't even treat them as human beings. Their feelings don't matter. Their plans don't matter. Their history doesn't matter. Nothing about them matters. Most of us have not heard about Hisselweb. In part because Israel censors, with the full cooperation of YouTube and Facebook, Israel censors what the people, Palestinian people of Hisselwan, can post and can tell about their plight. When Palestinians attempt to inform the world about their plight, Israel promptly takes down these sites. And as these are the same supporters of Israel, like Daniel Pipes and Robert Spencer, who will lecture Muslims ad nauseum about freedom of speech. Every Muslim has an inferiority complex within about whether they truly have the values of freedom of speech. But none of the same people who constantly talk about Islam and freedom of speech for an instant would condemn Israel for silencing and butchering a people. None of them would see the activity of Israeli censorship against Palestinians as contrary to human rights, or contrary to democracy, or contrary to First Amendment or freedom of speech, leave alone pontificating about whether Jews have an understanding of freedom of speech or not. That type of racist pontificating is only reserved for Muslims. If Israelis do it, well, they must have national security concerns. If Muslims are offended, leave alone do it, but are offended, is it because they are incapable of understanding values like freedom of speech? But what kills you is not just the racism of Israelis and the racism of Israel's supporters, not just the ethnic cleansing, not just the clear, unmitigated bigotry, but the way that Muslims have become fully complicit in this racial project. Israel wouldn't be able to do what it does in Hay Jarrah or Hay Silwan if it hadn't been for the betrayal of Egyptians, if it hadn't been for the fact that they know that they have nothing to fear when it comes to Egyptians, if they didn't know that Egypt is led by a government that is equally Islamophobic and equally racist against its own kind, a government that suffocates and strangles Gaza for so many years, simply to have a good standing with the Israelis and Americans. Israel wouldn't be able to do what it does if it hadn't been for the Emirati, if it hadn't been for the Saudis, if it hadn't been for the Moroccans, for the Sudanese, for the Bahrainis, all of which tell them you can ethnically cleanse all you want, you can usurp the Aqsa Mosque, and you can still count on our friendship. A more degraded people do not exist on the face of this earth. The leaders of Islamic countries are plagued by self-hate. And all the ailments of a broken ego that has lost the meaning of dignity and pride. Israel wouldn't be able to do what it does if it hadn't been for the fact that the Trump administration can move the American embassy to Jerusalem and not even the Palestinian Authority severed its ties with the Israeli government. Leave alone the Emiratis, the Saudis, the Egyptians. The Palestinian Authority knows what's going on in Hay Silwan and Hay and Jarrah. Do they do anything? Nothing. Other than verbal condemnation. Nothing. They don't even seize. The Palestinian Authority arrests people on behalf of Israel and jails people on behalf of Israel. The Palestinian Authority effectively is there to protect Israel's security. You might be tempted to say, because I always get this, okay, fine, so what do you want us to do? Why are you telling us this? Well, what can we do? Let me give you just a very small example. Again, I saw a news item from CARE. A Muslim girl called Huda is graduating at the top of her class in the weekly school, Old Westbury, New York. And as is the practice in this country, when someone is graduating at the top of their class, they get to give the graduation speech. And the irony is that Huda's speech was about having being brave enough to speak up and to have a position and to say your word. In the midst of her graduation speech, Huda dared to mention the ethnic cleansing going on against the Uyghurs in China and the ethnic cleansing going on against Palestinians in Israel. Reportedly, the parents of the graduating class attacked Huda so ferociously with numerous Islamophobic comments about go back to your country and the like. She's of Pakistani descent. That according to CARE, Huda ended up being hospitalized with anxiety and trauma that evening. One, what Huda did was the right thing. Two, I wish that all American Muslims would teach their children to be a Huda. To speak and to say what they have to say and to call it as it is and to take a personal interest in communicating the truth and in calling racists right to their face. If Huda would have come from the school of thought of Hamza Yusuf and his like, she would have kept her mouth shut and talked about coexistence and tolerance in vague terms and continued to let Muslims be the victims in the world to appease the dominant race and the dominant class. So perhaps the dominant race and the dominant class can give her a place on the table. But Huda did the right thing, what Muslims should do. But if Huda was my child, I would have warned her. When you speak the truth, you must understand that every racist and bigot on the face of the earth will target you. You must understand that when you speak the truth, those with guilty consciousness will act most viciously against you. Expect suffering, because that is the nature of jihad. And your reward for every second of suffering is with your God. And when people speak ill to you, your response should be equally aggressive and equally uncompromising and equally strong. When they tell you go back home, don't just take it and internalize it. Look back at them and say, you're a racist, you're a bigot. I don't speak to racists, I don't speak to bigots. When your principal comes and blames you for pointing out ethnic cleansing of Muslims in Palestine, look him in the face and say, you're a hypocrite. You're a coward. because the school apologized on her behalf. We get ethnically cleansed as Muslims, and the white dominant race apologizes on behalf of our children when they dare to speak the truth. Huda, if you mean what you said in your graduation speech, know that life is but a struggle and hardship. It is your ill fate that you were born a woman, and your ill fate that you were born a Muslim, and your ill fate that you were born a Pakistani. All the categories of people that are the constant object of racism and bigotry. And the response to bigots can only be to look them in the eye and speak the truth. And to say, you are bigots and racists and sexists. How dare you talk to me? Don't land in the hospital. Don't land in the hospital because you said the truth. Don't give them that satisfaction. Understand that this is a jihad, and your reward is with Allah, and that all the people of Sheikh Jarrah and the neighborhood of Salwan in the hereafter will pray for you and bless you for standing up for truth. Understand that racism and bigotry and colonialism has rotted the inside of Muslim societies to the core. And that you, Huda, and people like you are the only hope for a future. For those who ask, what can we do? Be a Huda. And if you can't be a Huda, the least you can do is to support Huda. The least you can do is to send a message of support to Huda. The least you can do is to send flowers to Huda. The least you can do is to send a gift to Huda. The least you can do as Muslims is to communicate to Huda that we are all with you, beside you, behind you, in front of you. That's what you can do. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم. صلى الله يستجب لكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن اتبعوا بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. This past week, we got the news of the death of a wonderful woman, a wonderful, young, brave Muslim woman, a muhajjaba, who doesn't fit the stereotypes of Orientalism about Muslim women. A Muslim woman who did not have to take off her clothes to prove her worth. A Muslim woman who is proud of her identity and proud of her Islam and proud of her gender. A woman named Alaa al-Siddiq from the Emirati. Alaa was killed in an accident in England. But the reason that this is suspicious and troubling is because of who Alaa was. Alaa is the daughter of a well-known scholar of Sharia. His name is Muhammad al-Siddiq. He was a professor in the Emirati. In 2012, as the Emirati has done with most professors of Sharia, and especially those who have any relationship with Jam'iyyat al-Islah, which the Emirati considers to be part of the Muslim Brotherhood, the Emirati arrested Muhammad al-Siddiq. Not just arrested him, but sentenced him to 5 years in prison and took away his Emirati citizenship. And not only him, but arrested several members of their family just to get at him, and took away their Emirati citizenship. And this is when Alaa appeared on the scene. Alaa first escaped the Emirati to Qatar. The Emirati government demanded that Qatar turn over Alaa, who had not committed a crime and had not done anything wrong. But this is a country of tolerance. The Emirati repeatedly demanded that Qatar hand over Alaa. And when Qatar refused, the Emirati accused Qatar of being a state that supports terrorism and severed its ties with Qatar. Alaa understood that Qatar couldn't withstand the political pressure, and she left Qatar and went to live in England. And in England, she started a campaign not just to help her father, who was severely tortured, but to help other Emiratis in political prison who were being abused and tortured. And Alaa, in her calm, confident, majestically beautiful way, would speak about the human rights violations committed by the Emirati and the hypocrisy of the Emirati pretending to be the country of tolerance with a ministry of tolerance. And then on Alaa's birthday, days before her father is due to be released from prison, Alaa was killed in London under mysterious circumstances. A car hit her. Only Allah knows the truth. And the poor father, who, if the Emirati releases him, because the Emirati has continued to detain people after their prison sentence was served, so only Allah knows, he will find out that his daughter is now dead. And the poor woman who lived since 2012 struggling to see her father released, or to just simply see her father, has left this world without seeing her father. But Alaa is not the only one. Alaa now is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And may Allah count her as a martyr. So many women have perished in Emirati prisons. Alaa Abdul Noor, a highly educated Emirati woman, arrested, imprisoned for daring to have an opinion about things that doesn't simply rubber stamp what MBZ wants and wishes. And Alaa Abdul Noor was a cancer patient, and the Emirat refused to treat her until she died in prison. Or someone like Maryam al-Baluch, again a highly educated woman, a proud Muslim, who dared have an opinion that is not to the liking of MBZ, arrested, tortured, disappeared, abused, and only Allah knows what state she is in now, because she continues to be in detention. What kills me, where are the feminist voices? All these self-declared Muslim feminists that sit there and love to pontificate about what they consider about feminism. Aren't these women heroes? Isn't Alaa a woman hero? Why isn't she the example for your feminism? Why isn't Maryam al-Baluch an example? All those who point the finger at Muslims and say they don't understand freedom of speech. Did you defend the freedom of speech of Maryam al-Baluch? Did you defend the freedom of speech of Alaa? We live in a world of so many lies and hypocrisies. That lies and hypocrisies that are aided by the stupidity and ignorance of non-thinking human beings. And I'm so tired of the ignorance and stupidity of non-thinking human beings. The biggest hypocrisy of all is any Muslim in the West who continues to have their name associated with the Emirati government. The Emirati government that didn't only kill Alaa and disappear countless women and disappear countless shuyukh, but the Emirati government that has murdered thousands upon thousands in Yemen, thousands upon thousands in Libya, that has overthrown the democratic government that used to rule Egypt and replaced it with a fascist military, and that has consistently worked to overthrow democracy in Tunisia, and that has been directly involved in the murder of thousands upon thousands in Syria. The Emirati government that has created a fund not to resist the expulsion of Palestinians in Sheikh Jarrah or in the neighborhood of Silwan, but had created a fund to support Israeli settlers seeking to expel and ethnically cleanse Palestinians. This is public information. The Emirati government that has bankrolled the genocide committed in Muslim Mali. Do you know by who? By the French military. The Emirati pays for the French military to slaughter Muslims in Mali at will. Everything in which there is persecution of Muslims, the Emirati is bankrolling. The Emirati bankrolls India and what it does in Kashmir. Defends China and what it does to the Uyghurs. And yet there are Muslims who call themselves Muslims, who still pray and fast, who sit there and admire so-called Muslim leaders, who continue to have their names associated with the fascist criminal government of the Emirati. How? How? Wallahi al-Azim, I will bear witness against you in the hereafter, because all of you who know of a so-called Muslim religious leader in the United States who is supported by the Emirati or who supports the Emirati, and yet you continue to fawn over them and applaud them and cheer for them, all of you are complicit in the murders being committed in Yemen, and the murders committed in Libya, and the murders committed in Egypt, and murders committed in Kashmir, and murders committed in China, and murders committed in Mali, as complicit as those Muslim leaders that support the Emirati government. Yes. If you go to a fascist and a tyrant and you applaud that tyrant and say, may Allah bless you, may Allah help aid you, may Allah strengthen you, leave alone giving them money or giving them a like on a video, you are complicit in the criminal enterprise of immorality. You are complicit in the criminal enterprise of immorality. You are complicit. Instead of supporting Hamza Yusuf, go support Huda. Give your life meaning. And stop being a symbol of living immorality in our lives as Muslims. عفى الله عنا وعنكم. اللهم اغفر لنا. اللهم ارحمنا. اللهم اهدنا لأقرب من هذا رشدا يا علي يا عظيم يا رب العالمين. Allah, forgive our sins. Grant us the straight path. Strengthen us to become better Muslims, more beautiful Muslims, more true Muslims. Muslims that stand for enlightenment and justice and truth. Ya Rabbal Alameen. وصلي وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه واتبعوا بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وأقم الصلاة.